Much. Come on out, Scott Adams.
Yes, sir. Pleasure. I hated following you. I'm not doing that again.
We're just waiting for Scott to join us for a Q&A. And I'll just set the stage a little bit while we're waiting for our guest to join us. We want to make sure that we don't neglect the very, very important issue of digital equity and connecting the dots. So this session, 20 minutes, will run right up until 5 till or 4 till, and we're going to chat about. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Drew, for having me.
Thank you.
What a great panel that was.
Well, it was awesome. Obviously, I wish we could have stayed longer. So you get the Q&As maybe.
Okay.
Not only for me, but we hope we'll have an opportunity to open it to our audience. Scott, of course, I was just starting to introduce you, but before I did that, I wanted to make sure we talk about why access, affordability, availability, and adoption matter for digital equity, and how these issues that we just spent 50 minutes talking about relate to the everyday Californian. And if you don't mind, just a little bit about yourself. Scott, of course, is the Deputy Director for Broadband and Digital Literacy at the California Department of Technology. And CDT, of course, is huge and hugely important in this issue. Would you be willing to just speak a minute or two about why California structured the way you did, your role, the role of Rob, the role of Mark Monroe, who will be in a later panel? Just talk a little bit about that for a moment, Scott, if you don't mind.
Got it. Well, I can't necessarily, I can explain how it works. How it was structured is really, left up to higher powers than myself. But I think what's important to understand is that the digital divide is a very complex and persistent issue. I think we heard Assemblymember Berner say earlier that people were talking about it back in the 90s. And when you look at the geographic size and diversity of our state and the size of our population, there's just an extreme need. And it's a complex equation. So it would make sense in a state like California that you would have multiple entities that take significant roles in this. And so I think, Rob Osborne explained really well the CPUC's historic role as a regulator and administrator of the Legacy California Advanced Service Program. Really, the Department of Technology's role in all of this is that they're historically the technology and IT leader in the state and have broad responsibilities over technology, but also increasingly broadband. And part of that is what Rob mentioned, that while this is a significant broadband moment, there is a series of moments that preceded this that set us up for this. And part of that was the establishment of the California Broadband Council, which...
Tell us a little more about that. What is that council? What does that do versus what Rob does at CPUC, what you do in CDT?
Got it. Well, the California Broadband Council was established in 2010. Really, it's a 12-member body of 9 state agencies, including the Department of Technology, the Public Utilities Commission, Department of General Services, Transportation, Education, Libraries, Office of Tribal Affairs, and 2 members of the Senate and Assembly each, and then 1 non-state entity, the California Emerging Technology Fund. And their statutory mandate since 2010 has been to, at the state level, coordinate the deployment of broadband in un- and unserved communities as defined by the PUC, and then also coordinate broadband adoption statewide. And it's been a unique resource and gem for California in that it's been sort of an all-of-government approach to coordinating the key entities that are required to contribute in the broadband continuum. And where CDT's role come in is that my boss is the chair of the Broadband Council, and our office, the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy, which has really been around administratively since at least 2010. We staff the Broadband Council and manage the interactions of the ecosystem of stakeholders working to close the digital divide.
So let's thank you for that lay of the landscape. So let's go back to this core question of how do we connect the dots? How do we make sure that infrastructure kind of is affordable, is available, is accessible, and usable?
I think it's a great question, Drew, and thank you for asking it. When we talk about the evolution of moments, Rob Osborne mentioned the Broadband Council. There was the governor's executive order that said, Broadband Council, this is in the heat of the pandemic.
That was 2020, the executive order.
That was 2020, and it was really acknowledging that without, that being connected to broadband and the internet at home is really the difference between being cut off and fully participating in life. That we need it for work, for education, for access to healthcare, economic development needs. I mean, there's so many, and when we all were forced to, work from home and to be there, those that didn't have access or didn't have service or the devices or the training they needed were cut off, essentially. And so why I'm bringing this up is that the executive order did a number of things. One of the most important things it did is directed the Broadband Council to develop a statewide broadband action plan, which they did in 4 months during the heat of the pandemic in collaboration with 700 entities, and they created the Broadband for All action plan. And that was really pre-IIJA, like an initial digital equity plan for the state. And what it acknowledged is that when it comes to the digital divide, that access and availability of infrastructure is one of the barriers to getting people connected. There's the affordability piece that we've talked about. That's also a barrier. But then there's the adoption piece. In this world of ubiquitous mobile phones, how can we educate folks about the difference between, connectivity on your mobile phone and connectivity at home and through a device with a keyboard? And then there's the whole digital equity component. So the Broadband for All action plan really brought it together and said that for California, that access, affordability, and adoption are all critical elements of achieving digital equity in the state. And the one thing that really helped crystallize the vision for Broadband for All in the state is aligning the 3 main goals for our Broadband for All program, which are basically that all Californians have access to high-performance broadband at home, schools, libraries, and businesses, that all Californians have access to affordable services and devices, and then, perhaps most importantly, that all Californians have access to the training and the skills that they need to fully participate in this digital world. And so that is really how Broadband for All was outlined in the action plan.
Well, let's drill down to both affordability and the education and resources. So on affordability, what have you done? What can you do with the Affordable Connectivity Program ended as of 5 days ago? What's Californians' role?
Yeah, that's, I think first what I would like to say is that the Affordable Connectivity Program was really one of the most significant digital divide programs that we've seen in a long time. Chairperson Rosa Morsel at the FCC had a number of communications indicating that that program over the last 2 years connected 23 million US residents to the internet, either keeping them online or connecting them online. Here in California, because of the work of the Broadband Council members, CDT, PUC, the state libraries, partnerships with CSAC, metropolitan planning organizations, nonprofits, et cetera, we've been able to connect 2.9 million California, actually 2.945, almost 3 million of Californians' eligible households to that program.
So of the 23 million you just cited nationwide, 2.945 are Californians?
Yeah, it's just over 13% are Californians. And when you equate that into dollars, it turned out to about just under $1.7 billion coming back to California. But you know, you can't sugarcoat it. It's been one of the most important tools for the state and the Broadband for All program to address both the affordability piece and to drive adoption numbers. And so it's going to be, you know, its absence will be felt here, and the loss of that arrow in our quiver.
Do you have a state lifeline component? Is that a source, or are there other things that you and others are talking about as a supplement in the absence of the ACP for now?
Yeah, well, you know, we have, first I'd like to say that part of, again, the output of the Broadband Council is we've established over the years Get Connected California mobilization, and that's really a result of the California Emerging Technology Fund and other folks that are committed to connecting California residents to existing low-cost offers and subsidies. And so that directive was included in the Broadband for All action plan, and that really was our mission, you know, moving forward, kind of pre-ACP. Yeah. We expanded it with ACP. 15 entities in California received over $6 million in FCC ACP outreach grants to do statewide promotion, enrollment support. CDT received a $750 million grant from that. So, you know, the question that is challenging for us to answer is, how do we replace ACP? The question, or the answer that I can give you, is we have the social network in place, and we have the partners in place to continue to do the work of affordability and adoption with the existing low-cost service offers, taking a look at both state and federal lifeline. You know, if they can be options, there's, I think, opportunities and challenges with both based on the eligibility requirements don't quite match up. There isn't as broad participation in those programs as there was with ACP, particularly on the other providers, but we're looking at all options.
What about the education piece? What is CDT's role, California Department of Technology's role? What are other parties' roles in helping to bridge that gap?
Well, CDT's role is as a convener, first and foremost, through the Broadband Council, but also in our additional duties of having developed the State Digital Equity Plan and implementing that. The education piece is key, and it's a multi-layer approach. I'm sure, I think Carl mentioned that he read the Digital Equity Plan. Thanks, Carl. And I'm sure you've read a bunch too. We took great care. There's a lot of barriers to, you know, the common barriers of access, affordability, and adoption, but when you look at the specific covered populations, there are very unique and personal barriers that are experienced by folks. And that education piece about how do, once you have access, how can you communicate? Who is the best messenger to communicate that there are affordable options out there to make the choice of having broadband at home in addition to your mobile phone, and then overcoming some other things. It's really working together with the network of our partners, trusted messengers, both at the statewide level and at the local and regional level, that they're going to be key partners. So Rob mentioned the wonderful adoption program that the CPUC runs. We're going to develop a digital equity capacity subgrant program that really empowers those trusted partners that are in community, of community, in language to you know, conduct those broadband, you know, adoption campaigns, education campaigns, do digital navigation services to help continue to carry the message forward and drive those results that, you know, connecting people. There's the infrastructure side, definitely. That's needed to offset the you know, the market constraints to deploying in unserved areas. But it's absolutely critical that we harness the human potential of our ecosystem to connect the individuals at homes and have impacts in their lives.
Let's just see if we have any, is there one or two people with a question they'd like to ask to this discussion? As I said at the beginning, we're going to have opportunities to come back to points about the middle mile program, the cost to build, as well as issues like net neutrality and privacy and California's role in those. I'm a little bit blinded, so you're going to have to really make yourself clear if you want to speak to us. But I want to get your thoughts, Scott, on these other topics, on the middle mile program and the budget crisis that is now before us, $2 billion potentially out of that program. We've already touched a little bit on the affordability connectivity program, but what is your take or your role on how the state should be reacting to this crisis of budget on broadband?
Yeah, thank you. I would say that when, I'm going to go back to the broadband action plan, and we can talk about the things that the state can do, but talk about the things that the state's already done. And so the action plan itself wasn't just a philosophical document. It actually had 24 specific action items that it directed CDT, the Public Utilities Commission, and a number of other state agencies and entities to set it up for this moment. And part of that is to go and seek additional funding, which we've done through Digital Equity Act dollars, through ACP, through BEAD. It assigned specifically to the Department of Technology to explore all opportunities to enhance permitting at all levels of government. And so using the middle mile is a use case. Once, the legislature and the governor were so gracious to kind of, allocate that funding, we worked concurrently at 3 levels of government, the federal, the state, and the local, to develop an MOU with 19 federal entities to establish a process to escalate issues related to permitting for the middle mile on federal lands. At the state level, we brought together the state permitting entities. We developed programmatic approaches and said, hey, this is an enterprise project. This isn't a one-off. How can we develop programmatic permitting approaches to treat all of these projects equally, and then went further and said, what are your constraints? And to those entities, it was funding for staffing and consultants. So through interagency agreements, we were able to allocate funding for those folks to increase their capacity to deal with permitting. And I think lastly, on the local piece, I see Jolia Jackson from the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. CDT and GoBiz worked very closely with a number of the folks in this room to develop a local government, local jurisdiction broadband permitting playbook. We really put together the best and smart practices that are out there, acknowledging our relatively limited jurisdiction over locals, but said, hey, this is a set of tools and steps you can take to put your best foot forward to support deployment of the last mile once it comes. Mm-hmm. I think another example of steps we took, I think one of your last panelists mentioned supply chain issues.
Yes.
One of the things specifically mentioned in the Broadband for All action plan is to leverage state procurement processes to support, deployment of broadband infrastructure. And so utilizing procurement processes, we were able to procure several thousand miles of conduit, of fiber.
The state actually purchased these.
The state purchased these.
Yeah, as kind of like a strategic repository?
Well, as a strategic approach, looking forward, I think as people said, there's the award of the money, there's the planning that goes into it, and then there's the time when you have to break ground. And so in between that is permitting. We tried to approach that, but then once you're putting it in the ground, there is the need to not have to compete with everybody else who's trying to get those materials. And so what CDT did, working with DGS and other folks within the state, Mark Monroe, my colleague, here who leads that program. His team's been excellent. They procured a large inventory of materials so that they, would have them available when they, were breaking ground.
Great. Scott, it's been a pleasure to
Spend
spend this
meeting you.
time with you. Please join me in thanking Scott Adams. We're now going to break. Whether you're here in person or live online, we'll be back at 1 o'clock Pacific time or 4 o'clock Eastern time. And please continue the conversation over lunch upstairs. Thank you again.